Welcome to Christmas from the North Pole, Christmas Countdown from Geek, Alabama. Join us every day during the Christmas season where we talk about stories from the North Pole and Santa Claus. And here to tell your stories is your host, Nathan Young. Welcome to another edition of Christmas from the North Pole, Christmas Countdown. In today's episode, we're going to talk about religion. Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus are very religious people, and on every Sunday, as of today when I'm recording this podcast, they do attend church services. Now, at the North Pole, usually it's just the Mr. Claus and Mrs. Claus only, and they have a pastor that lives in the North Pole that could do preaching and service and everything. But a lot of the time, Santa and Mrs. Santa will invite different pastors from around the world to deliver a sermon via the internet. That's the one great thing about the internet now. You don't have to fly physically to the North Pole to give a sermon to Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus. You can do it from anywhere around the world, and they can watch on a TV screen. And that's what they do now. Every Sunday, as long as Mr. and Mrs. Claus are in good health, they'll invite a different pastor from anywhere around the world to deliver a pretty quick sermon via the internet. And Mr. and Mrs. Claus are very appreciative of all the pastors around the world that volunteer their time to give a great message to Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus. And the elves are also pretty religious, but they practice a different type of religion than humans do. They're different types of creatures, I guess you could say. So, on Sundays, the elves, they take the whole day off. Even during the Christmas rush, they take the entire day off and they attend their own type of religious services. And their type of religious services is a little bit different. They don't do sermons like humans do. They kind of huddle around in groups and they do their own types of sermons instead, where one person delivers a type of sermon, one elf, every different Sunday. It's a different elf. But a lot of the elves are appreciative about their religion because they see Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus as very religious people every Sunday and all throughout the year as well. So religion plays a very important part while living in the North Pole because it's so isolated around the world, and community is so important for Mr. and Mrs. Claus and the elves. Thank you all for watching and listening to this episode of Christmas from the North Pole Christmas Countdown. We'll be back tomorrow with another great edition. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for listening to Christmas from the North Pole Christmas Countdown. For more stories, articles, and podcasts, please log on to geekalabama.com.